It's nice to have another guest on the podcast. It's been a hot minute since we had anybody on the podcast, and I actually think that you were the last one. No, Adam was. We did the first remote podcast in between our last ones. But what was the last book we read together?
11. Well, are we counting The Bodyguard?
Oh, yeah. We did The Bodyguard where you were the host.
Yeah.
But I read that one. And then the last one that we did together was
11/22/63.
That was back in January. So it's been a hot minute. We went the whole month of February without you having to record one. How was that?
Well, I had a host.
Yeah, but you recorded that back in like January.
That was rough.
You almost recorded that back in December. You were so nervous.
Yeah.
That one's actually doing pretty well, though, on the old YouTube. It does pretty well. It actually has one of the highest retention rates on the podcast. So as far as like keeping people on the podcast listening to it, it does really well. So
Oh, okay.
so you must be
It's
doing
not a
something.
boring book.
You must be doing something right.
No.
I mean, it's
Not
not
a boring book like
not
all your other books.
Oh my gosh, my other books aren't boring. You picked this book.
I did pick this book.
You were like, I want to do this one with you when going over my list. Also, my books aren't boring. And although The Bodyguard isn't boring, I don't know that I would have called it like, I don't know. I hate this phrase, but like on brand for the podcast.
It was more fun.
It was fun and it was good to have you do it. But yeah, it's definitely not a book that I would see myself picking up unless you ask me to.
Okay, well, one of your giveaway winners picked it, so.
Really?
Yeah.
What books have the giveaway winners picked so far? I know the latest one picked, was it All the Lonely People? That the one that you just sent out today for March?
Yeah. Yeah, All the Lonely People.
Love All the Lonely People. Do you know what makes me really sad?
Yeah.
All the Lonely People, the episode for that podcast, is kind of our New Year's one, which was like, it was released right in the middle of the holidays. And it has the least amount of views out of any episode.
Oh, shoot.
Even like the very beginning of the podcast, it has the least amount from any episode. And I know it has to do because it was released literally between Christmas and New Year's, and nobody listens to anything during Christmas and New Year's. And then it was also released in between two episodes. So it wasn't like a Wednesday episode. It was a special episode in between two episodes during the holidays. So the deck was stacked against it as far as an episode goes. But it's like one of my favorite books. So it makes me so sad that nobody's listened to it because I wish more people would read it.
Yeah, that sucks. But
what other books, though, have people chosen?
The Women. No, I can't remember. Oh, The Boys in the Boat.
Okay.
And The Bodyguard.
And The Bodyguard. Nice. So a little bit of variety there.
Yeah.
History, nonfiction, historical fiction, and romance.
Yeah.
Cheesy. So nice. But this week's book you picked, and it
Yes,
was The Five. And
it's not the full title.
yeah. So
You never include the full titles, and it drives me insane.
all right. Well, then what is the full title? Because I honestly can't remember the full title. It's like The Five, the untold stories of the women that Jack the Ripper killed. Something like that.
Something like that.
Go ahead and pull it up. Because while you're pulling it up, I'm going to pull up the description
The
of the
Five,
book.
the untold lives of the women killed by Jack the Ripper.
I almost got that. That was close. Close enough. Yes. So description of the book. I've been trying to read this towards early in the podcast so people can kind of get a good idea of what we're talking about. But it is Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane are famous for the same thing, though they never met. They came from Fleet Street, Knightsbridge, Wolverhampton, Sweden, and Wales. They wrote ballads, ran coffee houses, lived on country estates, and breathed ink dust from printing presses and escaped people traffickers. What they had in common was the year of their murders, 1888. Their murderer was never identified, but the name created for him by the press has become far more famous than any of these five women. In the devastating narrative of their five lives, historian Hallie Rubenhold finally gives these women back their story. So,
I think it's pronounced.
Hallie?
Yeah.
Hallie Rubenhold. Hallie Rubenhold.
Oh my gosh. Let's start this over.
Finally gives these women back their stories. So, it is about, if you can't grasp it yet, it's about the five women that are kind of considered the Canonical?
My gosh.
What is that called?
No.
It's what they're actually called, like the canonical murders.
Yeah.
Like the canon murders, the core murderers of Jack the Ripper, because it's Jack the Ripper's been allegedly like murdered somewhere between 5 and 19 people. I think is what.
I don't know exactly.
They have no idea, but they do know that all 5 of these women.
Well, they're pretty sure.
Yeah, they're pretty sure. They never caught Jack the Ripper, but they're pretty sure that all of these 5 women were done by the same person, just because of the description of the women, how they were murdered, and yeah, basically, and where they were murdered.
They were all in a short time period too.
Yeah, same year, 1888, all 5 of them, and all murdered very similarly in a similar geographic location. So they know that those 5 were Jack the Ripper, but then there's like more than that they think could possibly be him, but kind of vary based on, when they happened, how they happened, and where they happened. So these are kind of the 5. They're called I don't know what that word is, but it is a word. So that's what this book is about. It's about those 5 women. And just right off the bat, what did you think of the book?
I did like it. I am really glad I read it. I think I may have liked the concept more than the execution.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
I think my favorite parts definitely were the introduction and the conclusion. Like her reason for writing it may have been more enjoyable to me than reading it.
Okay.
I don't know. Do you want me to go through all the reasons why now or?
No. So I did want to kind of read a quote from the book that kind of goes over her, like why she wrote the book, because that, like you said, that's one of your favorite parts.
Yeah.
And you had told me that earlier. So I wanted to outline that in this quote. But because you make fun of my reading every time I read things aloud on the podcast, I'm actually going to just have you read it.
People probably think I'm so mean.
People probably do. What does that tell you about our relationship? Maybe you should be a little nicer to your husband.
Oh my gosh. Well, no, Kate, you're mean to me, but not on air. So.
Okay, for anybody listening to the podcast that doesn't know us, we love each other very, very much. And we are in a happy relationship, right? Do you want to just look at the camera, wink twice?
I don't like looking at the camera. I don't like being recorded.
Oh my goodness.
Pictures, please.
Yeah, but we're not mean to each other. I'm like worried that the police are going to get called.
Talking to each other at our cabin once, and my aunt was like, have some marriage advice.
We are very happily married with kids and a dog. And not just happily married because we have kids and a dog. We are in a happy relationship.
Yes, we are. It just is weird to have our conversations recorded.
We give each other a hard time. That's how we show our affection.
Yes.
We razz each other.
I talked about that in the bodyguard. If you would listen to my episode.
In the podcurd?
Did I? Oh my gosh.
This one's starting off phenomenal here.
Oh my gosh. Okay, this quote.
This is the reason why you liked the book. This is at the very beginning. This is her introduction, and this is what really caught your... I'm speaking for you because we talked about this before, but this is what caught your attention, what you really enjoyed.
My intention in writing this book is not to hunt and name the killer. I wish instead to retrace the footsteps of 5 women, to consider their experiences within the context of their era, and to follow their paths through both the gloom and the light. They were worth more to us than the empty human shells we have taken them for. They were children who cried for their mothers. They were young women who fell in love. They endured childbirth and the deaths of parents. They laughed and celebrated Christmas. They argued with their siblings. They wept. They dreamed. They hurt. They enjoyed small triumphs. The courses their lives took mirrored that of so many other women of the Victorian age, and yet so singular in the way they ended. It is for them that I write this book. I do so in the hope that we may now hear their stories clearly and give back to them that which was so brutally taken away with their lives, their dignity.
Yeah. So the idea is what you loved.
Yes.
I will say... Oh, keep going.
Sorry. It kind of rectifies my issue with true crime. I talked about it before. I hate people's tragedies being used for entertainment. I do like the history aspect sometimes of true crime, but I hate people's like tragedies being used for entertainment, and I hate an evil person being immortalized and, you know, becoming famous because of their brutal crimes. And like, I don't know, the first one that comes to mind, well, first Jack the Ripper, there's like
so much about
there's tours. You can go on Jack the Ripper tours in London, and there's t-shirts, and there's like, he's huge.
Yeah, I mean, but it was all over
before
newspapers.
This, if you could have said name one of his victims, couldn't name a single one.
No way.
Like if I asked you to name,
if you asked me to name them now, I still couldn't name them. But that's a mental problem.
But I asked you to name like one of Ted Bundy's victims, one of Jeffrey Dahmer's. Like, could you name a single one? No. Like nobody remembers them. Mm-hmm. History remembers the murderer. And so I love that this gave these women back their voices. You know, like I feel like, especially nowadays, just murderers and evil people get voices. Like the first one that comes to mind is that Dahmer movie or TV miniseries that they just made. It makes me so angry because they never asked permission for from the victims' families because they're all still alive. Like this was recent.
Yeah, that's just disgusting.
It makes me sick. And so I loved this, like trying to give these women back their stories and their names and their dignity.
Mm-hmm. So my overall impression of the book is that sometimes I get a little uncomfortable with the idea of feminism. I think you know that. You've actually complained about that to me before, that I sometimes get uncomfortable with it. And the reason why I get uncomfortable with it, I think a lot of other people could probably sympathize with me, is that sometimes feminism almost feels like I'm getting attacked.
Yeah.
Because I'm a straight white male born in I was born in, 1993. I'm 30 years old. Like I'm the demographic of people that are just not great in the world right now. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes feminism does make me uncomfortable, even when it should. Like I definitely think I'm a little bit more sensitive to it than I even should be. Like I'll be the first to admit that I'm probably oversensitive on a lot of feminist issues because of how I felt attacked with feminism, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. However, I feel like this book is the book this book gives me kind of that appreciation, and that it revitalizes that feeling of like why feminism is important. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Like this book does such a good job, in my opinion, of not attacking, but really bringing to light the issues that feminism tries to shed light on. Mm-hmm. So it's not an aggressively feminist book, but it is almost, in my opinion, like a perfectly feminism book that really goes to show the history behind how women were oppressed, why women were oppressed, what that could lead to, and then why it's so important that those things don't happen nowadays, and that, women are, again, treated equal, but also not just treated equal, but, kind of looked after, so that kind of in the kind of sexual assault side of things. I mean, there was a lot of things going on in this book that kind of show that in society then, but even society now, that those kinds of things have lasting effects on people and the negative effects that it has. So in my opinion, this book was really good for me as a reader because of that. It made me more feministic. Is that a word? Made me more of a feminist. I don't know. Made me more of a feminist reading this book because of the way that it wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't aggressive, but in the way that it told the history of the 5 women. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really cool for me personally. One reason why I truly, truly enjoyed this story. The other reason why I enjoyed it was probably the reason why you didn't like it, which was, for me, it felt like a true crime podcast. So I do enjoy true crime podcasts. I've listened to a lot of them. I enjoy true crime documentaries. I just kind of think it's fascinating, both from a how this happened perspective, but also from, really from a how this happened perspective, but also from I've never been in that situation. So just learning about the way that the world works and the way that people are and all those kinds of things. It just puts you into a new perspective on people. And the first 2 episodes of every true crime podcast or every true crime docuseries or anything like that always go about the victims' lives and who they were. And then it basically switches 180 and it just talks about the killer for the rest of the podcast. This one felt like the first 2 episodes of the podcast 5 times over again. And it was just fun because you just got to learn so much about the victims, and then it never cut to the nasty, gory part of true crime. It just focused on the women, who their stories were, what led them to this situation. And so it gave you a lot more empathy without kind of moving from empathy to disgust.
I was kind of waiting for her to slip in some details. I just was kind of waiting for it because that's in everything you read now. Like any true crime you read, they focus on the gory details. And I was really impressed that she stuck to her guns and like, I'm not going to talk about him.
Yeah. I agree. I was constantly waiting for her to be like, and here's the story of Jack the Ripper at the very end.
Well, like, and this is how she was killed.
Yeah.
This is how they found the body.
Or this is who they think Jack the Ripper was, and kind of go over like her possible discoveries of through her research, who she thinks it may have been. Because there's all these theories out there of who they think it could be, and all, I don't know, different demographics of people that they think could have done it. Not once through the entire book. Like the book was purely focused on the women.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really neat.
Yeah.
So that's what I liked about it. What did you not like about it?
I think what I didn't like is way smaller than what I did like.
Okay.
Like the importance of it, I think, outweighs what I didn't like. They're just kind of small things. First, I think I read it at the wrong time. I read it on vacation, so I couldn't like fully focus maybe. And I read it right after like a fun, fast-paced series, and right before another fun, fast-paced series that I'm reading.
Which fun, fast-paced?
Oh my gosh, I don't want to talk about it. Okay, right now I'm reading the Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon, and they're so cute and so fun. They also take place in London at this time, which is ironic, but it's kind of Pride and Prejudice like vibes. It's fun. Stop it. So it was definitely slower. And I think something that bugged me, well, one, sometimes it felt like she didn't have enough facts to write a book. It was a lot like, she might have done this. She could have done this. She might have talked to this person. She might have felt this way. So it felt really like speculative. Like she didn't really have enough. And so sometimes, okay, sorry. You can
I was going to say I just want to put like a little a little note to that. Because that was one of the big critiques on Goodreads when I'm trying to read more Goodreads reviews so I can kind of see.
Dangerous. Sometimes it can sway your opinion.
It can. But I try to not let it before, like I write out all of my opinions. And at the very end, I'm like, I just want to know what other people think.
Yeah.
One of the biggest critiques that kind of appeared multiple times throughout the Goodreads reviews was that exact point, that they felt like her research was not very well researched, especially for certain characters, like the Mary Kelly, like the actual prostitute. They really felt like
know nothing about her.
Yeah, so this is one of the quotes that I just want to read from somebody else's review because I think it kind of speaks to that point. And it is, I also have to note that Rubenhold's sources, especially in the Mary Kelly section, are more than a little suspect. She quotes W.T. Steed's The Maiden Tribute of Modern Babylon, a tract that has been widely criticized and discredited since it was published in 1885. Given this level of sloppiness, how well can we trust the rest of her research?
That's
so
harsh.
It is a little bit harsh, but where you kind of felt like some of the points were a little bit less researched and she kind of just throws in her own opinions. I felt
like she researched it. I just felt like there maybe wasn't a lot to research because these women were not given the time of, like, given any attention.
I agree with that.
So they were all very poor. So there was, nothing to keep track of their lives. At least 2 of them, there may be one more, were immigrants. So, they weren't even, their family wasn't even in London. A lot of their family had already passed on. I don't think there was anything of these women left. Besides their murder. So I don't know if she even had anything to work with.
I agree. And that's kind of to the point, I think, of that comment. And some of the other comments were just saying that, she fills in the gaps a lot where there is nothing. And I think that that's, I don't know, it made for an interesting story, but it also could lead to kind of some jumps in conclusions.
And sometimes she added stuff like on Kate, she talked about how her dad was in the tin trade, and she talked about it for a while. And I was like, I don't care. I don't care at all.
Yeah.
Like, skip.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. I didn't care. She spent a lot of time like where they were walking around, locations in London, which I lived in London for a couple months. A couple months out of 26, 27 years is not very long. And I recognize a lot of the names, but also I was like, I can't picture where these are in relation to each other. I don't this isn't helping me really get a clear image of their lives. And because there were 5 different lives being told, there were a lot of places, a lot of names. Sometimes it was kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
Kind of a lot of overwhelming, didn't seem relevant information.
Yeah. I could see that. There definitely was, because again, I think she tried to include every piece of information that she could find on these people, because I don't think that there was a lot. Yeah. If I had to guess, like you said, what she could find was, immigration papers and documents,
marriage
licenses, witness testimonies, because they did take witness testimonies from individuals.
The newspaper articles,
coroner reports, and then maybe even some basic employment history.
There were workhouse reports from women who were in workhouses.
Yeah, but that's just about it. So everything else,
and birth certificates of children and death certificates, because they all had children die.
But everything else, she kind of fills in a lot of gaps. And she even says at some points, a lot of assumptions being made and things like that.
She could have done this. We don't know what she did.
Which made for fun stories. But again, you kind of have to take everything with a grain of salt. Yeah. Now, I liked the premise of the book. And I liked, again, I felt like it gave a voice to these women. However, one of the things that I didn't like about the book was kind of the focus on the fact that they weren't prostitutes.
That's my other thing.
Because the purpose behind I liked her original statement of what the purpose was. The purpose was to give these women a voice. But then her secondary purpose that she just constantly reiterates throughout the book was history has it wrong because the women weren't prostitutes.
She can't even say they weren't. She says, we don't know for sure
that the women
were prostitutes. Which, that was kind of my issue too. I was like, even if they were, this is still horrific.
Yeah.
And no one deserves to be, they were killed brutally.
It almost makes it almost kind of seemed like her point was we should have more sympathy for these women.
Exactly.
Because they weren't prostitutes. They were like normal women.
Exactly.
When I felt like you should have compassion upon them regardless of whether or not they were prostitutes.
Yeah, it doesn't make it less sad if they're a prostitute.
Yeah. And so that to me felt a little bit, I don't know.
She did
shocking.
Kind of answer why it was important that they weren't prostitutes.
Do you have that?
Yeah. So, first she says it was important that they weren't known as that during the investigation, because she says, let me find the quote. And
just before you read the quote, I just want to say it's pretty much widely assumed that they were prostitutes. When she's trying to make the case that they weren't prostitutes, she's definitely going against the grain of history. So whenever you're going against the grain of history, obviously you kind of have to pick and choose your battles. And I feel like you have to stick to your guns. And so I felt like throughout this whole book, she was trying to kind of prove her point because it isn't widely accepted. So it comes up a lot throughout the book. But even on Wikipedia, I wanted to read just the Wikipedia entry on Jack the Ripper because, really, this book goes against the grain of what's widely considered as just fact. So it says Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer active in and around impoverished Whitechapel district of London, England in 1888. In both criminal cases filed and the contemporaneous journalistic accounts, the killer was called the Whitechapel Murderer and the Leather Apron. Attacks ascribed to Jack the Ripper typically involved women as prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of East End London. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, even in Wikipedia entry, it says the women were prostitutes. If you look in, I was watching a National Geographic thing on YouTube today, just trying to gain a little bit more information. First thing it says,
all the tours in London say they're prostitutes.
So I felt like she definitely tried to make a point, like because she's saying something that's against the conventional wisdom of most scholars. I felt, or not the conventional wisdom, the consensus of most scholars of the time, most newspapers, most everybody basically comes to a consensus that they were prostitutes. Because she's going against that, she tries extra hard to like validate that.
Mm-hmm. I can't find the exact quote. I'm looking for why it mattered at the time, but basically she says when the police just said, oh, they're prostitutes, it led the investigations in the wrong direction. They were looking in wrong places. Mm-hmm. So that was one reason why it was bad to label them all as prostitutes. And then she says, now why we shouldn't. One quote is, at times the coroner's inquest became a moral investigation of Polly Nichols herself, as if the hearing was held in part to determine whether her behavior warranted her fate. So by labeling them as prostitutes, it kind of turns it into a moral investigation.
Yeah.
Like, well, did they deserve it?
Yeah. Or does it really matter?
Yeah, exactly. So then when I read that, I was like, okay, so maybe it doesn't make it less sad, but it kind of changes the way that they thought about it at the time, and it changes the way that we think about it now, even unconsciously. Like, and she says at the very end, labeling the victims as just prostitutes permits those writing about Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Kate, and Mary Jane even today to continue to disparage, sexualize, and dehumanize them. So that kind of made me see her point a little bit. Like why she is so adamant that they're not remembered as prostitutes.
Yeah. And I was trying to think from like a law enforcement perspective, why they would maybe jump to a conclusion like that, because it definitely couldn't have helped the case to assume that they were prostitutes. Because like you said, once you make that assumption, you start looking in the wrong places. And so I was trying to think like, why would you just initially just jump immediately to that conclusion? Oh, this was a prostitute. Let's keep going. And then release that information. And then that's how it kind of snowballed from there. Once she talks about it a lot. Once the first publication or newspaper got a hold of the idea that she was a prostitute, it became almost sensationalized. Like it was like prostitute murdered. And it just adds, it's like the big wow factor. And then more and more people get investigated or get kind of pulled into this narrative that there's a guy out there killing prostitutes. It's a little bit more, I don't know, again, wow factor, like kind of seedy underbelly. But the only thing that I could think of that would maybe make it so that cops would say that, or like law enforcement would say that, would be to try to limit fear. Because if you say there's a killer out there just killing women, then there's a lot more people that fall into that bucket that walk the streets at night in London. But if you say there's a guy out there killing prostitutes, you can walk around London at night feeling generally pretty safe if you're not a prostitute. You know what I mean? So you feel, the town itself feels a little bit safer.
Yeah.
So I could maybe see that being almost like a false plant narrative from law enforcement to try to like reduce panic. But that would be the only positive thing I could think of from coming up with that narrative. Otherwise, it's pretty much all negative. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Well, one thing she kind of talked about is why they probably labeled them as prostitutes and just went on their merry way is because all of these women, maybe they weren't prostitutes, but none of them were living conventional, acceptable feminine lives. Like they weren't. I think a couple of them had left their husbands. One of them, okay.
So wait,
here's where the feminine rage comes up.
Let's go through them real quick.
Okay.
Because I have notes, and because this book focuses on these 5 women, I feel like we should give them names and backstories as well.
Okay.
We're not going to go super in depth. If you want in-depth look into each of these 5 women, read the book. Number 1, Polly Nichols. Polly Nichols was the wife of a printer, mother of 5, living in kind of middle class, I would say, London. Working class. She lived in kind of not assisted living, but a lower income subsidies house. Like, it was by Peabody & Co. It was
government assisted housing.
Government assisted. Yeah. It was designed to help people who were like morally, like, you had to go through a pretty strict, like, moral background check. Like, you had to be living with your husband. You had to be, basically like good people. You had to have a recommend from your employer that you were upstanding.
It's like BYU dorms.
Yep. Nice. And so they were living in that, and they were trying to make that jump from lower class to middle class. They were doing it too. They were making the jump at her and her husband. However, she starts to become an alcoholic at the same time.
Okay. No. Say why.
I'm not saying there. Even the author says that it's not known which way it goes.
Probably.
Oh my gosh, this is where I feel like feminism, I feel attacked, because you just don't know. But she was starting to become an alcoholic the same time her husband was cheating on her with the neighbor.
Yeah, so...
Well, I'm just saying you can't ascribe blame to the husband.
I can ascribe a little bit if he's cheating.
Yeah, but you could also see if he was married to a person who had just fallen off the rails and become an alcoholic, how he would reach out to somebody else for comfort. You even said in our All the Lonely People episode, you can be in a marriage and feel lonely.
Yeah, but you don't have to go sleep with someone.
I agree. The sleeping with somebody was a bad choice. I'm just saying, this is where she even says, as the author, she doesn't have a direct timeline for which caused which, but they both started down a path that was destructive for the other individual. Oh my gosh. So she leaves her family, leaves her husband to raise her kids, and decides that she's just going to go out at it alone. And then she basically, her life just spiraled out of control. She chose...
Her husband was supposed to pay her, like, basically alimony, but...
And he did for a while.
He did not. And he stopped.
Yeah, he stopped after a while. After he got sick.
No.
Was that not him? Was that somebody else?
That was someone else.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, he was supposed to pay her alimony.
No, and he married a side chick.
I don't know when that stopped, but either way...
It's when they got married.
Either way, even while she was getting her alimony, she was still sleeping on the streets because she was spending all of her money on alcohol and was still sleeping on the streets. I'm just saying.
Okay.
But either way, so that was her. She was sleeping on the streets, but she was never directly accused of being a prostitute. None of the associates that she ever was with said that she ever acted in kind of that way, never traded sexual activity for places to sleep or money. However, that was kind of the common practice from homeless women at the time, so that they could have a place to sleep. They would do those sorts of things. And so it was just assumed that she was a prostitute because she lived that lifestyle. Did I miss anything? You don't like my description of her?
No, it's fine.
That was Polly Nichols. Annie Chapman.
I'll say it at the end of all them because they were like all alcoholics.
Yeah.
About being an alcoholic at this time, but I can wait till the end.
Okay, Annie Chapman. She came from a respectable family. Her father was a soldier, and she lived a pretty middle-class life. However, while she was young, I think she said she was 12 at the time, 4 of her siblings died from scarlet fever and typhus.
In like a week.
Yeah, within a very short period of time. And then right after that, her dad committed suicide. So again, rough go of it. And her mom held the family together. Actually, an entire book should be written about her mom because her mom was awesome. She bought a house and rented it out to people and was kind of like this landlord and did everything she could to provide for her family in a time when women were not able to do any of those things. Her mom still did it. Like, what a rock star. However, Annie met John Chapman at this time, got married, and later it had been found out that basically since the time that all of her siblings died and her dad died, she was drinking, and she had slowly become an alcoholic over this time because of like the traumatic experience of that, and that just continued on for the rest of her life. And it had an effect on all of her children. She lost, I think, 3 out of 4 of her children to side effects from drinking while pregnant.
Now they recognize it as fetal alcohol syndrome.
And then one of her children was handicapped because of fetal alcohol syndrome. So she did have one that survived, but it was a handicapped child. And then this man that she married, John Chapman, was basically, he tried to live with her and tried to be happy with her, and eventually gave her an ultimatum that she had to either quit drinking or leave. And she just chose to leave, and then lived on the streets and had basically the same outcome as Polly Nichols. Nobody ever accused her directly of being a prostitute. She never showed up on police records as a prostitute. However, it was assumed that she was because she was homeless and she was a woman. And that's really all it took to be assumed a prostitute at this time. So that was her. Elizabeth Stride, number 3. Born in Sweden from a middle-class family. She lost her job. Oh, no, she was born in Sweden. Then she became a servant to a middle-class family. The word servant is always kind of weird to me because they were, I don't know, they just did like household stuff, but they were still paid and everything like that.
Yeah.
But it was like a live-in
housekeeper.
Yeah, live-in nanny, housekeeper, but
yeah, cook sort of thing.
Yeah. But then she lost her job, and it's not really known why she lost her job.
No, she was pregnant.
Was that why?
Yeah, but they don't know why. Like, the author didn't know why. If it was like a consensual affair, or if she was raped. But she became pregnant and was fired.
Mm-hmm.
But she lost the baby.
And then she became a prostitute because in Sweden, when you got pregnant out of wedlock, she was registered as a prostitute.
Mm-hmm. She had to go into the health department weekly for STD checks.
Yeah.
Which is humiliating.
And so basically because of that, she just assumed the role of
her story made me so angry.
Yeah.
Because she did end up getting syphilis while she was pregnant from the person who got her pregnant. And because of the syphilis or the treatments, because the treatment for syphilis was nasty, she lost the baby.
Yeah. And then because everybody assumed she was a prostitute, she just became a prostitute.
Yeah, she had no other options.
She's like, if I'm going to be...
No one would hire her again.
Yeah. If people are going to look at me like this, then I'm just going to do it. So she became a prostitute. And then eventually she wanted to turn her life around. This is another reason why it felt awful for her, because she really wanted to turn her life around. So she decided... So all prostitutes were in a national registry in Sweden, or like a city registry. I don't know if it was national, but they were in a registry at the police department. And you had to go in and, like you said, do these checks and all this kind of stuff. And she felt humiliated from that. So she decided that I want to go and have a fresh start. So she was going to move to England where no one would know that she was a prostitute, and she could restart her life and, get back on the right track. So she moved to England. She met a man named John Stride, got married. It was an older man. I think she said that the marriage wasn't like super filled with love, but it wasn't also
marriage
very
of convenience.
Yeah, it wasn't like a bad marriage, except he had a business that eventually failed. And because of that, he had to move to Flowery Dean Street, which was known as the worst part of East End London. It was like the worst street that you could possibly, like, there's bad parts of London. And then she describes this as like people in the bad parts of London say that they would never move to Flowery Dean Street.
Yeah.
And because of their failed business, that was their only option. And so they moved to this street. They didn't have food. They didn't have anything. And she fell back into prostitution and then ended up becoming a con woman and stealing from other poor people and just her life just spiraled out of control. Essentially, she just fell off a rail after really, really trying to turn her life around.
Yeah.
But she was definitely, once her life fell into shambles, she was probably the harshest described woman out of the book. You know what I mean? Like, she was not nice to even poor people.
Yeah.
But I mean, you had to feel for her. She really did try to turn her life around at one point. Again, the only time though that she was ever accused of being a prostitute was in Sweden. There were no records of her being a prostitute in London. She never was arrested for prostitution, none of her acquaintances said she ever was a prostitute. Everybody assumed that she got money because of the cons that she ran. She would tell people that she was part of a train crash. She would tell people that, all sorts of things. She read sob stories in the newspapers and then would pretend to be their relatives and then ask people for money. And like, she was just not a great woman, but because of that, people were skeptical to call her a prostitute because of the way that she would raise money other places. Catherine Eddowes, another one that I felt kind of bad for. I felt bad for all of them, but she was one that I felt bad for. This was the one whose father was in the tin trade. You just found that part.
So dumb. I don't care.
But she was actually more well-educated than some. So she was actually sent off to be like a formal education earlier. She could read, she could write. She was pretty well-educated. And she was sent off, or while she was in her education, her mother died. And then it was often assumed that if the mother of the household died, that the oldest daughter would come back and basically raise the family, fill the role of mother until the kids,
happened to Polly too.
Till the kids moved out, and then she could get remarried, or not remarried, but she'd get married for the first time and then start her own life. But it was kind of her role to step into mother. So she was brought back from her education. And then she got a job in the city from her family in kind of the tin industry that her father was a part of.
I just kept picturing the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz.
Nice. I don't even know what the tin industry is.
The Tin Man, that's all I could picture.
I just imagine people in there like bending metal.
I don't know.
I have no idea. And I don't even know what you would bend it into.
Just skimmed that part.
Just tin. But she eventually got caught stealing from her employer. And because of her father's status in the city, she wasn't tried for any crimes. He basically advocated on her behalf, but the employer fired her and said, don't come back. And so there was a traveling book salesman, Thomas Conway, who kind of swept her off her feet with this life of a vagrant where you could just kind of live wherever you wanted to, and there was no roots, and you could do what you wanted to, and there was all this freedom, and she didn't have to be tied down by this life of tin. And so she fell for him and moved with him, and eventually they struggled in London, or they settled in London. So instead of doing their traveling book tours, they decided that they were going to settle in London, and Tim Conway became an alcoholic and abusive. And ended up beating her pretty frequently, which then, to cope with that, she also spiraled into alcohol. And then she eventually left Tim, but never could kick the habit of being an alcoholic, which led her to also be homeless and assumed to be a prostitute again, even though there were never any accusations, and also there were never any formal arrests made for prostitution. So again, this is basically Hallie Rubenhold's argument throughout the entire book, that none of these four initial women were ever tried for or accused of by any of their close friends or acquaintances or even their landlords of ever being prostitutes. However, all four of them lived kind of a homeless lifestyle, which they bounced around from halfway home to halfway home, I would call it, or from, I don't know what that's called, but basically from government house to homeless shelters, government assisted housing to government assisted housing, and homeless shelters every single night, not knowing where they would sleep the next night. And so it was just assumed that they were prostitutes, even though none of them were charged with that. Now, the last woman, the fifth woman, Mary Jane Kelly, was the only actual known prostitute. She was kind of a higher, so nothing's known about her early life at all. And
She is an immigrant, but they're not sure from where.
From where? Yeah.
I
And
think Wales or Ireland.
And all they know is that she started off as kind of a higher end escort, like for rich people and for even royalty.
She had a madam.
I know, which is like a female pimp.
Yeah.
Which is really sad. I think that that's more disgusting than a pimp, to be completely honest. Women kind of doing that is absolutely evil. Not that men doing it is even more evil, but if you can like sympathize more and empathize more with women and then still do it, I think it takes a special case of evil. But yeah, so she had a madam, a female pimp that kind of convinced her that she could have a better life in Paris, and then just trafficked her to Paris. And then that completely fell apart. And because that fell apart, she went from being a high class escort to basically walking the streets in East End London. And then falling into the same exact lifestyle of everybody. But there's little else known about her. So whereas everybody else, they knew kind of who they married, where they were, different years, number of kids that they had, almost nothing is known about this Mary Jane. All that's known is that she was kind of a higher class escort, was conned into moving to Paris, and then basically lost everything and ended up just continuing to be a prostitute, except instead of doing it at high class London, she was doing it on East End and kind of wandering the same streets as all the rest of these women. So that is the five from kind of the five canonical. I think that's canonical.
Oh my, stop saying that word. It's not.
I have it written down here. Right, where is it? The five canonical. The canonical five. Look at that. Right there.
I know the word. I know how it's spelled. I don't think I could say it. So I'm just not going to say it.
Yeah. Murders from Jack the Ripper. And those happened between August 31st and November 9th. So very close together. So what did you want to say about all five of them?
So they were like all alcoholics. And while reading it, I was just thinking how easy it was to be an alcoholic back then. She even talks about it, how they mostly drank beer because the water was so unclean. So they're drinking beer from childhood.
And they even talk about how, like, as babies, some of their, like, baby medicine had alcohol in it.
That's what I was about to say. All their medicine was alcohol.
Yeah.
And there was no regulation on, like, the potency. People just made it, like, in their basement or their bathtub. Like, there's no regulation. There's no drinking age. Like, it's everywhere. It's so easy to get. You're drinking it from a young age. And all of these women had men in their lives that were alcoholics. Especially, they talk, Annie, her father who killed himself, he was an alcoholic. And her brother, at the same time she was an alcoholic, was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And it was acceptable for men to be alcoholics, but not women. Like, they were shamed and not given any help. One of them went to rehab. I think it was Annie. But it was not good. Like, there was no help available for alcoholics. They were just shamed. So I think it's just so sad. What were they supposed to do?
Yeah.
Like, I just think addiction is so hard.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think kind of the cross-section between, like...
Well, and then, sorry.
I was going to say the cross-section between addiction, like economic situations, obviously poverty, addiction, and then just kind of the time period in which feminism was non-existent. The cross-section between the three of those was basically an inescapable, just downward spiral. You know what I mean? Like, if you were somebody who hit the trifecta and you were a woman, you suffered from addiction, and you came from poverty, like, there was almost, and I want to say almost, but I would be willing to say absolutely no light at the end of the tunnel for you. Like, there was no program to help you get out of that. There was no There was no, social safety net. There was nothing for you.
The workhouses that they had to help these people were horrible.
Yeah.
I've read so many things and seen them on all like my period dramas that I watch. They were horrible. Mm-hmm. So you could go there. And honestly, living on the streets was better than these places. They were horrible. One of them, they all kind of get mixed in my head. One of these houses, I don't think it was a workhouse. It was like a homeless shelter sort of thing. The man who ran, like the manager, he was a man. He had a key to the women's quarters. And this woman, like there's record of her complaining, or like her friend said she complained. And they were like, sucks to be you. Like, he can do what he wants.
Yeah.
And he would do what he wanted.
There's like wide, like well-known rape and the stuff that went out in these workhouses.
And they were like, you're poor, sorry.
Yeah.
Sucks.
Well, and they basically said, especially for women who were married and then separated from their husbands, they were basically saying like, you
failed.
You already are a prostitute because you're not with your husband. So just accept that you can be raped.
This quote says, while separation from a husband was not uncommon among the working class, it spelled the end of a woman's status as a respectable member of that class. Culpability did not matter. According to the moral tenor of that day, even if a woman left her husband for good reason, she had failed.
Yeah. And so this is why, in my opinion, I enjoyed the book so much. Not because of all kind of like the dark and dirty sections of the book, but because it made me more of a feminist. Does that make sense? It put the kind of the focus not so much on men are bad, but more so the focus on like the lack of opportunities, the lack of respect, the lack of support, and everything that have been given to women during this time period, but also, it kind of extrapolates that throughout history. And I think that that's an important message to get, especially today when I feel like modern feminism is so much different than this kind of feminism. And a lot of the issues that women had in this book are obviously gone. Like, you can get a divorce from your husband now, and you don't have to prove that you have a reason. Like, it's a lot better. But something that still stands today is, I kind of read this while I've started listening to Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I haven't gotten very far. She was the girl who was raped by that Stanford swimmer, and he got like a couple months in jail. Is these women, if they are, victims of violence, then that's all they're known as. And so this is true for these women still how many years later? Yeah.
And it's still true today. Like, that becomes your whole identity.
Yeah. No, I could see that.
That's something that, and it also still is kind of, happens kind of, people's first inclination is like, well, did they deserve it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of that like, well, she dresses for it kind of mentality.
She was asking for it. Like, that mentality, I think, is still very relevant today. And it's a scary mentality to raise daughters in.
Yeah. No,
and one that, I try so hard, even from a young age, to stop.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And again, I think that's what makes this book so powerful, is that it does focus on the women, and it's able to convey that message. It's able to convey kind of the need for change. It's able to convey the struggle. It's able to convey all of that, again, from a very like non-aggressive way, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know, just coming from somebody who does struggle sometimes with that message, I felt like it was conveyed not perfectly to me, but it was conveyed in a way that was way easy to digest. Like, it made it so much more real to me than a lot of other, like, than the you need to change, you're the reason, you did this kind of message. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I did enjoy it, and it is a book that made me more of a feminist. then
Good. You have 2 daughters.
I know. And we are...
And a wife you should be nicer to.
Oh, my goodness. But it did... I don't know. It's crazy. We are lucky to live in this time.
Yes.
Because that's the other thing. It's like, you kind of have to take it in 2 directions. Like, one, you have to look at it and see like, okay, how can we improve? But the other thing is you have to look at it and say like, man, we've made a lot of progress.
Yes, definitely.
Like, these murders happened in 1888, and like, you know, like we were talking, basically, if you had left your husband, it was okay for men to rape you.
Yeah.
Like, we've made a lot of progress as a society. Like, I don't want it just to be doom and gloom that we have, nowhere. Like, it's only, like, again, men are still bad, because as a society, it's also good to read books like this and realize, like, yes, we have made a lot of progress in that direction, in that, like, I feel like this would not fly. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of this stuff wouldn't fly, and there are, safety nets in place. There are people that look after these kinds of things, and it's important to recognize progress, but also to recognize like why that progress is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, were you going to read something?
It's just kind of the same thing. I have a lot of quotes.
Yeah. I have one more quote here that I wanted to read here at the very end. Did you have an ending quote?
I'll read yours first. It might be the same one.
Go read it.
The victims of Jack the Ripper were never just prostitutes. They were daughters, wives, mothers, sisters, and lovers. They were women. They were human beings, and surely that in itself is enough.
Yeah. And I felt like that is another great point of the book, and kind of what ties the bow around it for me was that, kind of learning more about each one of these women was fun, but it was also, like you said, it gives the voice to the people that deserve it in the story. These were women whose lives were cut short, and like, it's not, they weren't cut short to immortalize Jack the Ripper. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we should be thinking about the victims, not Jack the Ripper. And it is sometimes interesting to learn about serial killers, and I fall victim to that too. But I do think it's important to take time to learn about the others too.
Definitely.
So, what would you rank this book on a scale of 1 to 5 for importance and 1 to 5 for fun?
For importance, I'd give it a 5. Just the concept overall is a 5. Just the fact that it exists is such a good thing. For fun, I think I'd give it a 3.5. Okay.
So for me, 5 for importance again. I think it's important, like, again, that it just exists is important, that you don't forget those names. And then 2 for the impact that it had on me. Easily a 5. For fun, 3.5, 4 is where I'm leaning to. Because it does read like a story, like a true crime podcast. It reads easy.
Well, you listen to it, which makes it seem more like that. So I think maybe listening might have... Well, okay, here's my problem. I highlighted so much in the introduction and conclusion. So I think read the introduction, listen to the middle, read the conclusion.
Yeah, I can see that being important.
I think, sometimes switching between audio and physical is the way to go.
Yeah, because I think audiobooks are, I don't know. To me, audiobooks are easier to listen to when it's stories, if that makes sense, and harder to listen to. Like, I struggle more with audiobooks on nonfiction books, but on fiction, and I know that this isn't nonfiction, but it reads like a fiction book.
Sometimes.
In my opinion, it does. And so, like, when it's just like, especially when it follows one character, I can like really just kind of continue on with that character. They're, I don't need to memorize a million different names. I don't need to know, who's talking at different points. It really just follows one character for a large section of the story. Audiobooks are perfect because you can just have it on and it paints the picture really well. So in my opinion, this is a great audiobook, and I would give it a 4 for fun, especially if you like true crime. It reads really easy on an audiobook. So, awesome. Well, thanks for being on the podcast. What's the next book you're doing?
I can't remember.
I can't remember either. I've been looking at all these books. I think so. Next week's book is
Ordinary Grace.
Ordinary Grace, which I'm excited. I started that one. I'm a little bit ways through it. You said it was one of your top 3 books from last year. So I'm really excited to read it. I don't think you're coming on again until maybe The Better Angels of Our Nature.
No, I think Quinn's doing that one.
The Coddling of the American Mind. Is that you?
I don't know. I can do more if you want.
Or the Poisonwood Bible.
So that get complaints.
Poisonwood Bible would put you into May. So you would get the whole month of April
I already read that one. Do you want me to reread that one?
I don't know. Maybe. Or we could just pick a different book, because I'm going to do a couple bonus episodes here, because I know I'm reading. I read in 0 to 1, which wasn't on my list, and I'm doing an episode of that with Josh. And then I'm reading another book about
I'm not reading The Road, I'll tell you that right now.
A World War II veteran that we'll put on the podcast as a bonus episode. So there will be a couple other episodes tied into here. So maybe we could do a bonus episode on a book that you liked. I know you really want to do the women, but that book isn't till...
I actually think you should have my grandma on for that.
When did I choose to write that?
I think it's in August.
July.
That was amazing. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I'm excited for that one. That one kind of gives me same vibes as this one, but same, but different.
It's also, yeah, I read this one right before, and Kristen Hanna is just incredible and impossible to put down. So.
Yeah. So we'll see. Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the podcast. For everybody who's still listening, make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. We're trying to get more comments. This is social media lady here. About books coming up, so we can have what you liked.
Commented.
I know, but we don't have a big Instagram following. Like, honestly, we have more subscribers on YouTube than we have on Instagram. So, we're trying to get more interactive, so we can have questions and stuff from people on whatever book's coming up next. So make sure to check us out on Instagram, because we're going to put like questions and look for comments and all sorts of things on Instagram. So if you don't follow us on Instagram, check out our Instagram. Also, make sure that you subscribe to us on YouTube, but definitely check out our Instagram this week. And if you are listening on Apple or Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. That's great. And I think I've got some new stuff coming up this week, but I don't want to announce it in case it doesn't happen, because I've done that quite a bit on this podcast. So we'll see if we can get it out on the channel. I know. I'm going to talk to you right after this episode, because we're actually going to do it right after this episode.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
I want to go to bed.
Stay tuned. All right. Thanks.